The alarm pierced through the stillness at 5 in the morning. Natalie Quinn reached over, turned it off with practiced ease, and lay there, staring at the ceiling of her tiny apartment. 3 quiet minutes, that was all she gave herself before the day took hold. Her mornings ran like a silent dance, a hot shower to rinse away sleep, careful brushstrokes of makeup, clothes already folded and waiting from the night before. By 5:45, she stepped into the gray morning light, coffee in hand, nodding to Victor, the security guard whose weary smile was the first face she saw each day. The subway was nearly empty, the car humming with that early-hour hush that made the city feel gentler somehow. She opened her phone, already preparing for another day shadowing a man who never seemed to rest. Daniel Whitaker, CEO of Whitaker Global, had sent a message. Need the Langford contract revised again. Section 4's still off. She'd already gone over that contract twice this week. Each time he found something else that didn't sit right. Still, she replied with one word. On it. By 6:30, Natalie sat alone in the vast open-plan office of the 42nd floor, the only light coming from her screen. She liked this part of the day, the quiet, the focus, the feeling that, for a moment, everything made sense. She moved through her tasks with care, setting up documents, organizing meetings, preparing Daniel's world before he even stepped into it. At 8 sharp, the elevator chimed. Daniel walked out like he always did, flawless, unreadable, phone in hand, attention somewhere far ahead of the moment. His suit looked like it had been poured onto him by a tailor with magic hands. He passed her without a glance. "Your coffee," Natalie said softly, falling into step beside him. "Langford contract is on your desk. I flagged the changes in Section 4 and added the early exit clause you mentioned last Thursday." He took the coffee, still not looking up. "The Singapore investors are prepped. Their profiles and key points are in the folder. Lunch is scheduled, same place, same time." A brief nod, then finally a flicker of eye contact. "At gala next week, send my regrets." She hesitated. "That's the one where you're receiving the Civic Development Award. The press will be there." The board asked, "Send Natalie," he said, not to her but to Marcus, his assistant on the other end of a phone call. "She knows what to say." Natalie blinked. Had he just assigned her to accept his award? Daniel finally looked at her, pausing mid-step. "You can handle it, right? Same speech? Community this, growth that. You've written enough of them. Time you delivered one." Then he turned, walked into his office, and the door clicked shut behind him. Just like that. That afternoon, Natalie sat at her desk, the gala invitation resting quietly in her hands. 3 years. Countless early mornings. Quiet victories. Work no one saw but everyone depended on. And now she was being sent not as a voice, not as a partner, but as a placeholder. For a man who didn't even say thank you. Natalie had long since grown used to being invisible. She didn't need praise. She didn't ask for credit. She just made sure things worked. Daniel's calendar, his calls, his last-minute demands, she handled it all with military precision. Problems were smoothed out before they ever reached his desk. Needs were met before he even voiced them. She wasn't just good at her job, she was exceptional. But to Daniel Whitaker, she was still just another cog in a machine he'd built to revolve around himself. "So, he's sending you?" Marcus leaned against the edge of her desk, arms crossed, brows lifted. Unlike Natalie, Marcus worked inside Daniel's private office, handling high-profile meetings and public appearances. Natalie managed the rest, the pulse and pressure of Daniel's day-to-day world. "He's skipping the gala?" she asked. Apparently. Even his friends thought it was odd. At lunch, Reynolds joked, "What's next? Letting her run the whole company?" Natalie's cheeks warmed. And what did Daniel say? Marcus shrugged. He just laughed. Said it's some meaningless award. He had better things to do. Of course. Just a meaningless award. To a man who had everything. One more piece of recognition meant nothing. But to Natalie, who had spent years standing quietly in his shadow, it meant something more. This was a moment, even if it wasn't hers, not truly, even if she was just a stand-in. It was still a stage, and she was going to stand on it. That night, instead of heading straight home, Natalie paused in front of a boutique she usually passed without a second glance. If she was going to represent Daniel Whitaker at one of the city's most prestigious business events, she wasn't going to show up in another off-the-rack office blazer. She stepped inside. Just once, she thought. She wouldn't blend in. The week passed in a blur of schedules and signatures. She barely had time to breathe. But the dress, an elegant emerald green she'd hesitated before buying, hung in her apartment like a promise. A whisper of something different. On the night of the gala, Natalie stood in front of her bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress hugged her gently, framing a silhouette usually hidden beneath safe, neutral workwear. She'd spent an hour carefully doing her makeup, learning how to let her brown eyes speak. Her hair, usually swept back in a tight ponytail, now fell in soft waves. "Just an assistant," she whispered to her reflection. Then she smiled, slow and quiet. Not tonight. The Regent Ballroom at the Archer Hotel shimmered with Manhattan's elite. CEOs, investors, developers. Their conversations hummed beneath glittering chandeliers. Most nights, Natalie would have entered through the service door, clipboard in hand, scanning the room to make sure every detail was perfect for Daniel's arrival. But not this time. She walked through the front entrance, invitation in hand. "Natalie Quinn, representing Daniel Whitaker," she said to the hostess. The confidence in her voice surprised even her. Heads turned. Some of the faces were familiar men who had barely glanced at her in boardrooms, now giving her second and third looks. Women who once offered her tight, dismissive smiles now watched her with quiet curiosity. "Natalie?" The voice came from Richard Donovan, one of Daniel's frequent golf partners. He approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "You look different." She accepted 1 glass, her expression composed. "Different roles call for different appearances," she said smoothly. His eyes lingered just a second too long. "So Daniel couldn't make it?" "Mr. Whitaker sends his regrets," she replied, the lie sliding out effortlessly. He had urgent business matters. She'd been covering for Daniel's absences for years. This was no different. "His loss," Richard said, with a smile that wasn't entirely professional. "Come, let me introduce you to a few people." Across the city, Daniel Whitaker sat alone in his penthouse, not at a gala, not at a podium, not thinking, perhaps, about the assistant who had just walked into a room full of power and finally taken up space she had always earned but never been given. In the stillness of his penthouse, Daniel Whitaker sat alone, a glass of 30-year-old scotch in hand. The television played quietly in the background, tuned to a local business channel recapping highlights from the gala he had so casually skipped. His original plan had been simple: just check the coverage, make sure Whitaker Global got a favorable mention, then move on to something that actually mattered. But instead of the company name, something else caught his eye. The camera swept across the ballroom, pausing on a familiar face in an unfamiliar light. Natalie, in a deep green dress that turned heads, laughing at something Richard Donovan had said. Daniel stared at the screen. "What the hell is she wearing?" he muttered under his breath. His fingers moved toward his phone, halfway through typing a message to Marcus, then froze. What exactly was he going to say? That his assistant looked too good at an event he couldn't bother to attend? He tossed the phone aside, turned up the volume. The announcer was introducing the Civic Development Award. And then she appeared again on stage this time, walking up with a grace he didn't know she possessed. Natalie had always moved efficiently, always quietly in control behind the scenes. But this was different. There was a calm poise in her every step, a quiet power. She reached the podium, took a breath, and smiled. Not the polite office smile she wore during investor meetings. This one was real, unapologetic. On behalf of Daniel Whitaker and everyone at Whitaker Global, she began, I am honored to accept this award. Daniel leaned forward. He expected the same rehearsed lines he'd seen her write dozens of times, the ones designed to please donors and press. But the words she spoke didn't sound like lines. We believe buildings are more than steel and concrete, she said. They're part of people's lives. They shape not just skylines, but communities. Every structure we raise should leave behind more than shadows, it should leave belonging. She spoke with conviction, as if the words weren't his at all, but hers, as if she meant everyone. The room on the screen was captivated. So was he. And when the broadcast cut to commercial, Daniel was still staring. The scotch sat untouched. His chest felt tight. It wasn't jealousy, not quite regret. But something shifted. For the first time he wondered, had he spent all these years underestimating her? Back at the gala, Natalie found herself surrounded by strangers who suddenly wanted to know her name. Congratulatory smiles, handshakes, business cards. The same people who used to look past her now couldn't seem to look away. But one man stood apart. Philip Langford, CEO of Langford Development and Daniel's oldest rival, waited until the crowd around her faded before stepping forward. Ms. Quinn, he said smoothly, his tone calm, deliberate. That was an impressive speech. Natalie knew who he was instantly. Daniel had files on all his competitors. She'd organized them herself. Thank you, Mr. Langford, she said. You spoke with such passion about Whitaker's mission, he continued, studying her with eyes far sharper than his pleasant tone suggested. One might almost believe they were your own words. She held his gaze. I've been at Whitaker Global for 3 years, and tonight, it seems, the world finally saw you, he said, pulling a card from his pocket. I see potential where others overlook it. Just remember that. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the card in her hand, its embossed lettering catching the ballroom light. And for the first time, Natalie felt it. Something had shifted. Something deep. Tonight, she hadn't just stood in for Daniel. She had stepped out on her own. And someone had noticed. The next morning, Natalie arrived at the office even earlier than usual. The city was still quiet. The sun not yet fully risen, but her mind was awake, still humming with everything the night before had stirred. She powered on her computer, checked Daniel's schedule, organized his calls. But something inside her had changed. She wasn't just the woman behind the curtain anymore. She had stood in the light. And for once, it had felt like it belonged to her. The title on the business section still read Whitaker's Shadow. But for the first time, Natalie Quinn didn't feel like a shadow at all. She was mid-thought when her phone buzzed, breaking through the quiet of the early morning. The number was unfamiliar. Natalie Quinn speaking. Ms. Quinn. Philip Langford here. I hope I'm not calling too early. His voice was smooth, certain. Natalie sat up a little straighter, instinctively glancing at Daniel's still empty office. Not at all, Mr. Langford. How can I help you? I wanted to say I was genuinely impressed last night. Your poise, the way you spoke, the intelligence you showed, all that brilliance wasted. Standing in Whitaker's shadow. Her response came automatically, polished from years of practice. I'm very happy with my role at Whitaker Global. Langford chuckled, low and knowing. 3 years as his assistant, and he sends you to collect an award on his behalf while he sips scotch in his penthouse. That's loyalty. But is it being returned? Natalie didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence said enough. Have breakfast with me tomorrow, he added. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. Before she could respond, the elevator doors opened. Daniel Whitaker, earlier than usual, walked in with a tension in his step that made Natalie's stomach turn. "I have to go," she said quickly. Westfield Hotel. 8:00 a.m., Langford said before hanging up. "Don't let loyalty to someone who doesn't value you become your reason for staying small." She set the phone down just as Daniel reached her desk. His expression, usually unreadable, was focused, almost sharp. "Good morning," she said evenly. Instead of his usual distracted nod, he looked at her for a long moment. "You're all over the business news this morning." He dropped a folded newspaper onto her desk. There she was, frozen in print. That green dress cutting through a sea of monochrome tuxedos. The headline read, "Whitaker's Unknown Asset Shines at Industry Gala." Natalie kept her voice steady. "I followed your standard speech structure, kept the focus on Whitaker Global and its role in community development." Daniel cut her off. The speech was fine, his tone was clipped, but there was something in it, maybe the closest thing to a compliment he'd ever given her. Before she could react, Marcus appeared beside them, tablet in hand. "The Henderson Group is already in the conference room." "And Natalie, congratulations. Everyone's talking about you today." Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he said flatly. It was one event, one speech. Natalie didn't respond, but the sting of dismissal hit harder than she expected. What had she been hoping for? That one night would rewrite 3 years of being overlooked? The day passed in a blur. By late afternoon, Natalie had made her decision. She would meet with Langford. What harm could there be in listening? At 6:30 p.m., the office had mostly emptied. Natalie was gathering her things when Daniel appeared again, standing at her desk like he had something to say but wasn't sure how. "You're still here?" "Just finishing up," she said, too aware of the weight of Langford's business card in her purse. "Your schedule for tomorrow is updated." Legault moved their meeting to 2 instead of 11. She nodded, then paused as he lingered. "You got a lot of attention last night." His voice was quieter now, but something in the way he said it made her meet his gaze. "It was nice," she said honestly, "to be seen." The words hung there between them, too honest to take back. Daniel's expression shifted, but before he could say anything, Natalie continued. "I got a call today from Philip Langford." His face hardened, just slightly. "Langford? What did he want? To offer me a meeting? Possibly a job?" She watched him carefully. "And you're going?" he asked, voice even but edged. "I'm considering it." Daniel let out a short, dry laugh. "He's just using you to get to me. That's what this is." But Natalie didn't look away this time. "Or maybe," she said gently, "he just saw something in me that you never bothered to look for." "Or maybe," Natalie said, her voice steadier than she expected, "he just saw something in me. Something you've chosen not to see for 3 years." The words hung in the air between them, and for a flicker of a second, something shifted in Daniel's eyes, a flash of anger. Or maybe it was hurt. Before he turned away, sealing himself behind that cool, unreadable mask she knew too well. "If that's what you want," he said flatly, "go ahead." She had expected more, an argument, a reason to stay, some acknowledgement of what she had given to this place, what she had given to him, but all he gave her was nothing. Just those 5 hollow words. "If that's what you want, go ahead." She picked up her things in silence, the weight in her chest growing heavier with each breath. "Good night, Daniel." She walked to the elevator, her steps deliberate, ears straining for the sound of her name. Some call to stop, some sign that her leaving mattered. But there was nothing. The elevator doors slid closed. He never said a word. The next morning, Natalie sat across from Philip Langford at a quiet corner table inside the Westfield Hotel's sunlit restaurant. He smiled over the rim of his coffee cup, relaxed and certain. "You don't belong in anyone's shadow, Natalie. Work with me, he continued. I'll give you the position you've earned, Director of Operations, a real leadership role, triple your current salary, your own team, authority. And most importantly, he leaned forward, eyes sharp but sincere. Recognition for your talent. The offer stunned her, not just for its generosity, but for what it meant. All the things Daniel had never said. All the things he had never even seen. Why me? She asked cautiously. Because I know potential when I see it, Langford replied. And let's be honest, it would drive Daniel insane. At least he was honest. I won't be a pawn in your rivalry, she said. You won't be, he said calmly. You'll be a smart investment. He slid a folder across the table. Your contract. Take the weekend. Think about it. Natalie stared at the folder. It felt strange to see her future printed out so neatly. So real. So terrifying. She returned to Whitaker Global after the meeting, the folder tucked carefully in her bag, like a secret waiting to breathe. The office felt different now. Smaller. Temporary. Like a place she had already started to leave. As she reached her desk, she noticed Daniel standing near the window of his office, phone pressed to his ear, posture tense. His jaw clenched, his hand curled into a tight fist. Something was wrong. She stayed quiet, organizing the day's files until he stepped out, his expression hard. The Robertson deal is falling apart, he said abruptly. They're backing out. The Robertson deal. 6 months of delicate negotiations, the cornerstone of this quarter's growth projections. Natalie instinctively reached for her tablet. Do you want me to schedule an emergency already handled? He cut in. Marcus is taking care of it. She froze. Marcus? That had always been her job. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I see. Is there anything else you need from me? Daniel looked at her then, really looked. Something flickered behind his eyes, guilt, maybe, or pride, or both. How was your breakfast? So he knew. Of course he did. Productive, she said, keeping her tone measured. Did Langford make you an offer you couldn't refuse? He asked. His voice was sharp now, tinged with something she didn't want to name. She took a slow breath. This moment had been building for years. He offered me a director position, she said evenly. Triple my salary. My own team. Daniel laughed, short and bitter. And you believe him? Langford would promise the moon to steal one of my employees just to get under my skin. Natalie repeated his words quietly, like tasting something that had gone sour. One of your employees. Is that all I am to you? Isn't that all I've ever been to you? Natalie asked quietly. Just another name on a list. Another asset in your corporate portfolio? Daniel didn't flinch. What else would you be? The question was blunt, emotionless, too honest to be easy. It hung there in the silence between them, heavy and cold. And yet, somewhere inside her, the answer was already forming. What had she imagined? That she meant more? That she had earned more? That somehow, over 3 years of unwavering loyalty and quiet sacrifices, she had become trusted? Apparently not. Then, I'm accepting Langford's offer, she said, voice calm despite the tremor pressing at her throat. She hadn't made the decision until that very moment, but once spoken, it felt irreversible. Daniel's face went blank the way it always did when something touched a part of him he didn't know how to confront. If that's what you want, he repeated, echoing the same hollow line from the day before. Natalie stood still, waiting, hoping that maybe this time he'd say something more. Something to show that her leaving meant something. But he didn't. He turned back toward his office, pausing only to say over his shoulder, standard notice is 2 weeks. HR will handle the paperwork. And that was it. No protest. No attempt to keep her. Not even a polite goodbye. She sat at her desk, the ache in her chest deepening into something she couldn't name. She had expected this decision to bring relief. Vindication, maybe. Instead, all she felt was hollow, as if something essential had been scooped out and discarded. By mid-afternoon, the office had begun to buzz with whispers. The news spread quickly. Some coworkers came by her desk with hesitant smiles and awkward goodbyes, unsure of what to say. HR sent over the transition forms efficient and cold. At 5:30, Daniel left for a dinner meeting without a glance in her direction. Natalie stayed late. She wasn't the kind of person to leave chaos behind. Not even here. Not even for someone who couldn't be bothered to say thank you. She organized every file, labeled every folder, prepared notes for the person who would sit at her desk next. The space she'd once filled so invisibly. The 2 weeks that followed passed in a strange blur. Daniel didn't acknowledge her resignation. He kept moving emails, directives, meetings delegated more through Marcus now, as if she were already gone, like he was erasing her piece by piece. On her final day, Natalie arrived to find a small group gathered around her desk. Someone had brought cake. A farewell card had been signed. She smiled, thanked them, hugged back, even though part of her felt like a ghost already passing through. Daniel's door remained closed. It wasn't until late in the day that it opened. She looked up just in time to see him walk past, straight to the elevator. No glance. No pause. No goodbye. The doors slid shut. He was gone. When the building had emptied, Natalie quietly packed the last pieces of her time at Whitaker Global into a small cardboard box. 3 years reduced to so little. A spare pair of heels, lipstick she barely used, a framed photo of her parents, a mug someone had given her on her first day. She placed her company phone and security badge on the desk, the final gestures sinking into her chest like a weight. She turned to leave, and there he was. Daniel stood in the doorway of his office, looking more surprised than anything. "You're still here?" "Just finishing up," she replied, lifting the box. "Your replacement starts Monday? Everything's in the transition folder." He nodded stiffly, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Good." A silence grew between them, thick and uncomfortable. Natalie held it for a moment. Then finally, she couldn't anymore. "That's it? 3 years, and all you have to say is, 'Good'?" His expression flickered. Regret? Frustration? It was hard to tell. "What do you want me to say?" he snapped, voice quieter but sharper than usual. "Congratulations on your new job? Thanks for your service?" Then, softer people come and go in business. It's not personal. The words landed like a slap. Not personal. Of course not. Because to Daniel Whitaker, she had never really been a person at all. "Goodbye, Daniel," Natalie said softly, walking past him toward the elevator. He didn't follow, didn't speak, didn't try to stop her. And as the elevator doors slid closed, the last thing she saw was him standing alone in the quiet office, watching her leave. 2 days later, Natalie began her new chapter. Director of Operations at Langford Development Group. Her own office, her own team, her own voice. She had promised herself she wouldn't look back. And for the most part, she didn't. 3 weeks after her departure, the cracks began to show at Whitaker Global. The order Daniel had once taken for granted had slowly unraveled into an avalanche of missed details, rising tension, and mounting frustration. "Where's the Henderson file?" Daniel barked, rifling through the disorganized stack of papers on his desk. His new assistant Emma, or was it Eliza, stood in the doorway, clearly on edge. "Legal requested it yesterday for review, sir." I emailed you about it." Daniel checked his phone. 57 unread emails blinked back at him. Natalie would have never let that happen. She'd filtered everything, brought him only what needed his immediate attention. He never had to ask twice. "The Wilson meeting starts in 10, Marcus said, stepping into the room. "And Thompson's called again. He's pushing hard on that zoning issue." Daniel rubbed his temples, already feeling the familiar dull ache forming behind his eyes. "Reschedule Wilson. Tell Thompson I'll call him tomorrow." "Wilson's already in the building," Marcus replied. "And the zoning deadline's Friday." 3 weeks ago, none of this would have landed on his plate. Natalie would have already smoothed things over with Wilson. She would have rescheduled with Grace, sent an apology gift, extended the meeting over lunch. Thompson's issue? The solution would have been in his inbox, drafted, polished, ready for his signature. But Natalie wasn't here. "Fine. Give me 5 minutes, Daniel snapped, turning to the disarray on his desk. The days blurred into one another. Emails unanswered, deadlines forgotten. Decisions delayed. It wasn't that Eliza was incompetent. She was bright, eager. She followed instructions, but she wasn't Natalie. She didn't sense his shifts in tone, didn't know when to push and when to hold back, didn't read the silence between his words. Daniel kept telling himself it was just a matter of adjustment. A new rhythm would come. The disruption was temporary, but the truth was harder to ignore with each passing day. Natalie's absence didn't fade. It widened. That evening, Daniel sat across from Lucas Chen, his oldest friend, and one of the few people who could say exactly what he thought without worrying about consequences. "You should call her," Lucas said over dinner, his tone casual but firm. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Call who?" Lucas rolled his eyes. "The Queen of England." "Who do you think?" "Natalie." Daniel's expression tightened. "She didn't run the company. She assisted. She held it together," Lucas corrected. "You relied on her more than you want to admit." Daniel swirled the amber liquid in his glass, avoiding his friend's eyes. "She left. People leave jobs. It happens. She left because you drove her away." That silenced him. Lucas leaned forward. "And now you're here, drinking alone while she's out there building something that actually matters. I saw the press release. Langford's new community initiative? She's the one behind it." Daniel stared into his glass. He didn't argue. Because somewhere, deep down, he knew it was true. And it was the first time he realized what he had lost. Not just an assistant, but someone who made everything work. Guess who's heading it? Daniel didn't need to guess. He'd seen it too. There she was, Natalie Quinn, standing next to Philip Langford at a polished press conference, poised and confident in a sleek navy dress. The photo was everywhere: news outlets, company feeds, investor bulletins, Director of Community Engagement and Operations, front and center, smiling. Not the polite, practiced smile he'd grown used to seeing in the office, but something more assured, unapologetically herself, and it twisted something inside him, something he couldn't name. "You miss her," Lucas said, cutting through the silence as they walked back from dinner. Daniel scoffed. "She was my assistant. Then why are you following her career moves like a jealous ex?" The words hit a little too close to home. Daniel didn't answer. That night, alone in his penthouse, he poured himself another drink and opened his laptop. He typed slowly, Langford Development Group, and hit enter. Her profile appeared instantly. Natalie Quinn, Director of Community Engagement and Operations. Her photo sat neatly under the leadership team banner. She looked different. Not just polished, but present. Stronger. Lighter. Real. Was she happier now? Did Langford see what he had so carelessly overlooked? The thought sparked something bitter inside him. Langford, of all people, always watching for weaknesses, always circling for the upper hand. Was this just business rivalry? Or was it something deeper? Daniel closed the laptop suddenly, disturbed by the direction of his thoughts. He didn't dwell on former employees, didn't get caught up in departures. People came and went. Business moved forward. That was the way it worked. Except this time, it wasn't working. Nothing was. The meetings felt heavier, the days longer, the silence in the office louder. He told himself it was temporary, just transition. But the truth was sharp in its simplicity. He missed her. He missed her calm, her instincts, the way she could read the room, read him, the quiet way she challenged him when no one else dared. The unwavering presence she carried 3 years of stability he hadn't even known he needed until it was gone. And worst of all, he had taken her for granted. He had made a mistake, one his ego had tried to ignore, but one he could no longer unfeel. Daniel Whitaker had built his legacy on being right about timing, about deals, about people. But he had been wrong about her, and now he had to decide, was he going to let that mistake stand? Across the city, Natalie sat at the head of a conference table, reviewing designs with the Langford development team. It had been 6 weeks since she stepped into her new role, and she was already leading major initiatives. Her voice was respected, her ideas were implemented, and her name finally carried weight in every room she entered. "The community center plans look promising," she said, flipping through the renderings. "But we need to think about more green space. That neighborhood's been starved of it for years." Nods of agreement followed. People were listening. From the back of the room, Philip Langford stepped in quietly, hands in his pockets. "Excellent suggestion," he said smoothly. "Natalie has a remarkable eye for community needs. It's exactly why I hired her." His praise should have landed softly, but it didn't. Instead, it echoed in her chest a hollow note, because Langford's compliments always felt calculated, earnest on the surface, but always tied to some invisible string. She smiled politely, but something about it sat wrong. Even now, even here where she was seen and heard, she wondered if she was still playing someone else's game. As the meeting wrapped, her assistant Jenna appeared at the door, face flushed. "Miss Quinn, sorry to interrupt, but—" She hesitated. Natalie stood, curious. "What is it?" Jenna glanced toward the hallway. "There's someone here to see you." "Who?" Jenna leaned in, lowered her voice. "Daniel Whitaker. He's downstairs. There's someone here to see you," Jenna said quietly. Natalie didn't look up from her planner. "I don't have anything scheduled this afternoon." Jenna hesitated, then stepped closer, her voice dropping. "It's Daniel Whitaker. He says it's urgent." The air in the room shifted. Every head around the table turned, eyes wide. Everyone at Langford Development Group knew the backstory, the corporate rivalry, the silent tension between Daniel and Langford, and of course Natalie's connection to it all. From the doorway, Philip Langford raised an eyebrow. "Daniel Whitaker is in our building?" There was something like amusement in his voice. "By all means, take your office. I didn't realize Whitaker made house calls." Natalie stood, pulse quickening, but her expression stayed composed. "I'll handle it." The walk down the hall felt longer than usual. What could Daniel possibly want? Was there some dispute over her transition paperwork? A client she'd taken with her? Or was it about Langford's recent acquisition of the riverfront property Daniel had been circling for months? When she entered her office, he was there, standing by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the city skyline. He turned as she entered, and for the first time in years, Daniel Whitaker looked unsure of himself. Still polished, still composed, but softer somehow. Worn down in a way she didn't expect. "Daniel," she said, closing the door behind her. "This is unexpected." He nodded, like the words weren't coming easily. "You look well," he offered at last. Natalie folded her arms. "What do you want?" She didn't come here for small talk. Not after the way he'd let her go without a word. He exhaled. "I was wrong." The words landed like a soft knock against her armor. She blinked. In all their years working together, she had never heard Daniel Whitaker admit to being wrong. Not once. "Be specific," she said. "About not valuing you," he said, voice low but steady. "About seeing you as just my assistant." about letting you walk away when I should have fought for you." She stared at him, trying to reconcile this man with the one who had stood silent as she packed her things. "Why now?" she asked. "It's been 6 weeks." 6 weeks and 4 days, he said automatically, then looked away embarrassed. "Not that I've been counting." Despite herself, a flicker of amusement passed through her. "Of course not." He ran a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture of frustration she'd seen hundreds of times. "The company's struggling," he admitted. "Everything's harder, slower, less whole." And there it was. "So this is a recruitment pitch?" she asked, disappointment creeping in. "No," he said quickly, firmly. "That's not why I'm here." "Then why?" He looked at her, Parsier, eyes suddenly unguarded. "Because I miss you." The words came all at once, as if they'd been trapped for weeks. "Not just your work. You." Natalie felt something shift inside her. The wall she'd built up cracked just slightly. "You miss me," she echoed slowly. "The person you once called nothing personal?" He flinched at the reminder. "I didn't mean that," he said. "I was trying to protect myself. From what? From realizing how much I depended on you." He said, voice quiet. "How much I needed you. How much I still do." She looked at him, caught between hope and doubt. "After everything, could this be real? What exactly are you saying, Daniel?" He hesitated, then stepped forward closer, but not too close. "I don't want to be that man anymore," he said softly. "The one who overlooks the people who matter. The one who only learns their value when it's too late." There was something in Daniel's voice, something she had never heard before. Not the smooth, persuasive cadence he used in meetings. Not the careful charm that closed deals and won rooms. This was different. This was real. Natalie felt her posture soften, though her heart remained cautious. "What do you want from me?" she asked gently. "Nothing," Daniel said. "I'm not here to ask you to leave your job. I'm not pretending I deserve another chance. I just needed to say it. I needed you to know I was wrong." She studied him, truly studied him for the first time in weeks. For years, he had worn his certainty like armor. But now, standing in her office, he looked nothing like the powerful CEO the world revered. He looked like a man finally stripped of his pride, one who had learned the cost of silence. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. "I need time," Natalie said quietly. He nodded slowly. "I can give you that." He turned to leave, but as he reached the door, a question that had lingered in her chest for weeks escaped before she could stop it. "Daniel?" He paused. "I never wanted you to change," she said. "I just wanted you to see me." He turned halfway back, and for the first time, a small, unguarded smile touched his lips. "I do now." More clearly than ever. Then he left. Natalie remained at her desk, eyes on the closed door. 6 weeks ago, she'd walked away convinced she meant nothing more to him than her function on a spreadsheet. But now, everything had shifted, and she didn't know what to do with that. The contract sat on her desk, Langford's signature scrawled confidently across the bottom. Her project, the Community Development Initiative, had been approved. It was hers. A milestone. A win. She should have felt triumphant. But instead, her thoughts kept returning to Daniel. His words. His face. His regret. 3 days later, Langford appeared in her doorway, smiling like a man who always knew the outcome before the conversation began. "Congratulations," he said. "The board's thrilled, especially with how quickly you built rapport with the neighborhood council." "Thank you," Natalie said automatically, sliding the signed contract into a folder. But Langford was watching her closely. "You've seemed distracted lately. Everything all right?" Since Daniel's visit, Natalie had found herself comparing them. Langford and Whitaker. Their leadership. Their character. Daniel had been cold, but honest. Langford was warm, but always calculating. His compliments had angles. His generosity, fine print. Just focused on the project timeline, she replied smoothly. There's a lot to coordinate. Langford didn't look convinced. Whitaker's visit, what was that about? He had some transition questions, she said, the lie easier than she expected. After 6 weeks, Langford crossed his arms. Unlikely. He leaned against the frame of her office door. He wants you back, doesn't he? Natalie kept her voice even. We didn't talk about that. Langford's tone sharpened. I didn't just bring you here because you're talented. Taking you from Whitaker was a victory I enjoyed. She opened her mouth to respond. If you're considering going back, I'm not. She cut in. But the words tasted hollow, even to her own ears. Daniel and I cleared the air. That's all. Langford seemed to accept it. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. Good. You're far too valuable to lose. After he left, Natalie sank into her chair. Valuable. The word echoed. But to whom? To Langford as a trophy? A checkmate in a rivalry? To Daniel now that he'd seen what he'd lost? Or to herself? Her ambitions? Her peace? Her worth? That evening, Natalie walked alone through the city park. The early fall air crisp around her. She'd been given everything she once thought she wanted. A title. A team. Respect. But why then did it feel so fragile? Her phone buzzed. A message. The message lit up her screen in the fading light of evening. No pressure. Just checking in. Daniel Short. Simple. No request. No agenda. So different from the flood of clipped, demanding text she used to receive from him. Now it felt human. As she walked, memories surfaced uninvited. Not just the long hours, the silence, the feeling of being invisible, but other things too. Late nights at Whitaker Global, when Daniel had shown up at her desk with coffee and no words, just a small nod that said thank you. The time he sent her home early when she couldn't stop coughing. The quiet, good work he'd offered after a negotiation that had gone better than expected. Small things. Moments she'd forgotten or perhaps buried under years of being overlooked. They hadn't erased the pain, but they had been real. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was from Langford. Need you to review the press release tonight. We're making you the face of this project. Natalie stared at the screen. Daniel had asked for nothing. Langford continued to demand. Even his opportunities came with expectations. Even his praise came with terms. 3 days stretched into a week. On the surface, Natalie thrived. Her role at Langford was exactly what she'd thought she wanted. Authority, recognition, visibility. But beneath the success, something felt off. The community project, the one she had poured herself into, looked perfect on paper. But the deeper she looked, the more cracks appeared. Corners were being cut. Community feedback was being ignored. Everything streamlined in favor of margin and timeline. She raised concerns. Langford waved them off. This is business, Natalie. We make the necessary compromises to move things forward. Once, those words might have sounded like Daniel, but now... She wasn't so sure, because somehow she believed Daniel might listen now. If she challenged him, he might actually hear her. After another meeting that left her feeling drained and voiceless, Natalie walked. No destination, just the need to move, to think. Somehow, her steps led her to the familiar glass building that had once felt like her whole world, Whitaker Global. She didn't plan to be there. She didn't even know why she came. But when the security guard saw her, he smiled. Miss Quinn, nice to see you again. Is he in? She asked before she could stop herself. Mr. Whitaker? Always late. Go on up. The elevator felt like a time machine. Each floor rising brought memories with it. She almost expected to see her old self at the top, clipboard in hand, quiet, efficient, forgotten. Instead, she found someone else, a woman, Eliza, not Emma, rushing at her desk, papers stacked in disarray. "Can I help you?" she asked, not recognizing her. "I'm here to see Daniel. Do you have an appointment?" "Mr. Whitaker is— It's okay, Eliza." Daniel's voice came from the doorway of his office. He looked surprised, but also relieved. "Natalie can always see me." Eliza stepped back, confused but nodding. Daniel motioned her inside, closing the door behind them. The office was messier than she remembered. Files everywhere. Coffee cups left on the side table. "Sorry about the chaos," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Still adjusting to your absence." Natalie moved to the window, looking out at the skyline she knew so well. "That building across the park," she said quietly. "It would have been perfect for the community center we're developing." "I know," Daniel said. "I tried to buy it." She turned to face him. "Why didn't you?" He hesitated, then said the truth plainly. "You left. I was distracted. Missed the filing deadline. The admission wasn't easy for him. She saw it in his eyes." "Daniel," she began. "I meant what I said last week," he interrupted gently. "But I didn't come here to take you from Langford. I didn't come to sabotage anything. I just needed to be honest." Natalie searched his face, looking for the old version of him, the one who only spoke in outcomes and projections. But he wasn't there. This man, he was different. Smaller, maybe, but somehow braver. "I have a good job now," she said slowly. "I have a voice. Autonomy. I'm finally being seen." "You deserve all of that," Daniel replied. "And I hope, wherever you are, whatever you choose, you keep being seen. Fully. I just hope he appreciates what he has." Daniel's words lingered, heavier than either of them acknowledged. Because that was the real question, wasn't it? Did Philip Langford truly see Natalie for who she was? Or just what she symbolized, a trophy plucked from Daniel's shadow? Natalie didn't answer right away, because she wasn't sure. She hadn't come here about the job. She wasn't here to negotiate or to return. "Then why did you come?" Daniel asked quietly. A simple question, but the answer was anything but. Why had she come? To see if his words were sincere? To understand the difference between what she'd walked away from and what she'd walked into? Or maybe, just maybe, to confirm the feeling that had grown louder each day, that Langford had given her a title, yes, but not value, not her value, only what she could bring him. "I came because I needed to know if you meant what you said," she admitted softly, "about seeing me." Daniel stepped closer, his expression open in a way it had never quite been before. "I do, Natalie," he said. "I see you." And for the first time she believed him. 3 months later, Natalie sat by the window of a small cafe tucked away between Langford Development and Whitaker Global. A quiet spot. Neutral ground. Safe space. She checked her watch. Daniel was never late. That hadn't changed. Sure enough, at exactly noon, the door opened. He stepped in, scanning the room until his eyes found hers. "Sorry, I'm a few minutes behind," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Transit Authority meeting ran long. Natalie raised a brow. "Since when do you attend community planning meetings?" A small smile tugged at his mouth. "Since I realized some things deserve my personal attention." The waitress appeared and placed a black coffee in front of him. No words exchanged. He still came here often then. "How's the Richardson project going?" Daniel asked, referring to one of her new developments at Langford. "Challenging," Natalie admitted. "Langford wants to cut back the affordable housing piece for profitability, but I've managed to convince the board it's worth it for long-term community trust." Daniel nodded. There was a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "He's lucky to have you fighting those fights." The simple acknowledgement warmed her more than she expected. 3 months ago, words like that from him would have felt impossible. After their conversation in her office that day, she'd returned to Langford's world with clearer eyes. She didn't walk away from her projects, they meant something to her, but she had drawn firmer lines, pushed back when it mattered, fought for principles she used to keep quiet. To her surprise, Langford had listened at least most of the time. Her voice had started to mean something more than optics. Meanwhile, Daniel had changed too. Not drastically, he was still meticulous, still driven, but there were signs. He'd reshaped his executive team, lifting up people who had gone unseen for too long. He'd begun incorporating many of the community strategies Natalie had once championed, and he'd dismissed. And perhaps most surprising of all, he started showing up in person at public forums, zoning hearings, neighborhood meetings. Listening, not delegating. "How's Eliza working out?" Natalie asked, sipping her coffee. Daniel let out a reluctant laugh. "She gave notice last week." "That's 3 assistants in 3 months. 4th, actually," he said with a sheepish shrug. "Apparently I'm impossible to work for." Natalie laughed, shaking her head. "You don't say." Their weekly lunches had started as quiet check-ins, not interviews, not negotiations, just 2 people trying to understand who they were outside of roles, outside of power, outside of the noise, and maybe slowly learning who they were to each other. They had learned how to talk again, to sit across from each other not as boss and assistant, but as 2 people trying to navigate something unfamiliar, something real. "I have a proposition," Daniel said, setting his coffee cup down between them. Natalie tilted her head, cautious but curious. "If it's a job offer, the answer's still no." Daniel smiled slightly. "It's not. Not exactly." She raised an eyebrow. "Then what is it?" "A collaboration." That made her pause. He continued. "The city's pushing for a unified plan on the waterfront redevelopment. We've secured the northern section. Langford has the southern. They want a cohesive proposal." Natalie had expected this issue to surface eventually. The project was too big, too visible. "So you want me to talk Langford into going along with your vision?" "No," Daniel said, surprising her. "I want us to design it together, something that works for both companies and the community." She studied him. The old Daniel would have been angling for control, pushing for dominance. But today, he just looked open. Steady. "Why?" she asked quietly. He didn't flinch. "Because you taught me something," he said. "That the best developments aren't just about numbers, they're about creating places that mean something, that last." He paused, then added, "And because even if it's indirect, I'd rather work with you than against you." His honesty caught her off guard. There was no hidden agenda, no angle, just truth. Natalie nodded slowly. "I'll talk to Langford. He won't love it, but he'll see the logic." "Thank you," Daniel said. Then, after a moment more gently, "You know, this doesn't have to be just about work." She looked up. "What do you mean?" He gestured between them, the space they'd carefully rebuilt over the past few months. "These lunches, us. We're not just old colleagues anymore." "No," she agreed. "We're not." They weren't sure what they were, exactly. Friends? Yes. But something else was forming, too. Something quiet, steady, unexpected. "So, what are we?" Natalie asked, her voice low, bold in a way she wouldn't have dared once. Daniel considered the question, his expression unguarded. "2 people figuring it out," he said, "without titles, without hierarchies. Just figuring it out." She smiled. "I like that." They weren't some sweeping love story. No grand confessions, no cinematic moments, just 2 people with a complicated past finding their way into something better. Together. "One step at a time?" he asked. She reached across the table, her fingertips brushing his hand. One step at a time. They weren't perfect. Daniel would always be ambitious, exacting. Natalie would always hold her ground, ask hard questions. But now, there was mutual respect. And something far more important, a willingness to see each other fully. Flaws, strengths, history, hope. As they walked out of the cafe together, autumn light dancing across the pavement, Natalie realized something she hadn't known she needed to hear. Sometimes, the best beginnings don't come from dramatic changes. Sometimes, they come from finally being seen, truly seen for who you are. And sometimes, that's enough. You've just finished Natalie and Daniel's story, a journey of letting go, waking up, and choosing differently. If their transformation touched something in you, leave a comment below. What resonated most? And where in the world are you watching from? Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help us keep telling stories like this about the invisible things that change us, the quiet moments that heal us, and the people who remind us we're more than our roles. Where are you joining us from? Let us know in the comments. We can't wait to share the next story with you.